Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Tales of Herding God Part 250 based on novel. So let's start. In Supreme Emperor Heaven, the territory of the devil race, Luli took her leave from Fu Riluo. Respectable king, I've left Yudu for too long. I need to return to Yudu, and I will be leading my army away. Fu Riluo frowned slightly and asked, Senior sister, has yet to capture son of Yudu, so why are you in a hurry to leave? The visitors from Mingju won't give me a chance to capture son of Yudu. Even though I'm obsessed with attaining the power of son of Yudu, I also know myself. With my power, I can't fight with Mingju, so I've decided to retreat. Luli hesitated for a moment and said, Respectable king, since both of us are devils, let me give you 3 pieces of advice before I leave. Fu Riluo responded curiously, Senior sister, please speak. The first piece of advice is to endure, no matter what happens, endure. The second piece of advice is to pull back. The reason the tortoise lives such a long life is because it's good at pulling back its head. The third piece of advice is loyalty. There's nothing wrong with loyalty. Farewell. Luli screeched loudly, causing countless Yudu monsters to transform into black smoke and disperse. Luli's body turned around, and she gradually sank into the ground, vanishing without a trace. The spirit energy mutual shift bridge. Qin Mu finally let out a sigh of relief, and first ancestor human ancestor headed to the abnormal star to instruct the gods entering eternal peace to move slower. Only then did the spirit energy mutual shift bridge stabilize. Only then did he felt a sharp pain coming from his chest. Lu Qianzhong had created 2 wounds on his body when he pierced his chest. He had destroyed the middle prong on the fork aimed at his heart. Even though the other 2 prongs pierced him, they had missed his vital spots. That was why his third sword light was the most important. It protected his life by destroying the fatal threat. Lu Qianzhong was extremely strong after all, and even though Qin Mu had avoided the fatal blow, the damage he had caused was still quite significant. The dragon saliva alone wasn't enough to heal him. Remains of Lu Qianzhong's divine arts that had yet to be driven out were still in his wounds. Qin Mu cleaned his wounds and got rid of the remnants from Lu Qianzhong's divine art. He executed Anusrava creation mysterious scripture, and together with the dragon saliva, he managed to feel much more comfortable. Commotions came from the bridge, and Qin Mu walked forward, only for him to find the divine arts practitioners guarding the bridge were stopping Qijui and Zhehuali. The guard saw Qin Mu walking over and immediately said, Cult Master, these 2 people are from the devil race and are clamoring to go to eternal peace through the bridge. Qin Mu said with a smile, Senior brothers, you have come into the human territory, and you still want to go into eternal peace. Aren't you afraid I will kill both of you? Zhehuali shook his head and said, Brother Qin, you aren't such a person. Abiding by the rules of the martial world, in a one-on-one fight, I'm not afraid of anyone in the human race other than you. Luo Qianzhong injured you during your fight. You might not be my opponent. Who says I'm going to abide by the rules of the martial world? Qin Mu was bewildered. What I'm wearing is the official robe of the Eternal Peace Empire, so I'm abiding by the rules of the Imperial Court. The rules of the Eternal Peace Imperial Court is that there are no rules when fighting. Qijui became nervous and would raise his head from time to time. Qin Mu became suspicious when he saw Qijui examining the surroundings. Was Qijui looking around to see if he would get everyone to beat him to death, or was he looking out for something else? He raised his head to look at the sky, but couldn't see any abnormality. Why must senior brothers go into eternal peace? The star is currently entering eternal peace, and the energy that is shifting over is too huge. If you guys want to cross into eternal peace through the bridge, the energy that will be shifting over will be even larger. Qin Mu said sincerely, "Give me a reason, and I might just agree." Zhihua didn't know why Qi had to go to eternal peace, so he looked towards Qi. Qi's expression flickered between dark and clear. He gritted his teeth and said solemnly, "Cult Master Qin, even though I'm learning from Mingju's black deity, I can't always stand Mingju's methods and ways of handling affairs. I have something I need to do, and I'll stop after achieving my goal." However, they will stop at nothing. The way they do things is too ruthless and too cruel. Since we are borrowing your path to save our lives, I will have no choice but to tell you what they are about to do. Qin Mu listened patiently while the other people were busy strengthening the spirit energy mutual shift bridge. True God Pang Yu led everyone to use their magic power to control the vibration. True God Pang Yu had learned numerous methods of calculations over the few years, but his attainments weren't that high. He could only rely on incomparably dense magic power to stabilize the bridge, as he was helpless when it came to fixing the runes. Qi continued to say, "Even though you also have a life and death book, you don't know the power of the life and death book. The life and death book of Mingju can control life and death, reawakening the dead. Mingju's black deity makes this kind of treasure, and no matter if the souls of the dead were hiding in Mingju or Yudu, they would be summoned by the life and death book forcefully." Qin Mu's heart leaped. The life and death book has this kind of ability. Doesn't this mean that Lufu can mobilize all of the dead in Supreme Emperor Heaven to fight for them? The three of them are equivalent to an army of gods. Not only that, Qi said, their aim isn't Supreme Emperor Heaven, it's Lufu Heaven. Qin Mu cried out, "Saint Woodcutter is in danger." Qi shook the plume on the back of his head uneasily. "Brother Qin, your understanding of their ruthlessness and cruelty is too kind. Mingju uses all kinds of despicable methods when it comes to dealing with their affairs. Not only did they break the Pact of Earth Count and make the promise between the devils and humans invalid, they still want to destroy Supreme Emperor Heaven and take all of you down in one fell swoop." The information blew Qin Mu's mind. "What you mean is, Lufu and the rest would sacrifice Lufu Heaven and cause Lufu Heaven to collide into Supreme Emperor Heaven? Impossible, there will be numerous casualties in the devil race. Won't he be offending the devil race as well? Fu Riluo he." His voice rang out in the surroundings, and the people strengthening the sacrificial altar stopped to look at them. "That's why I said you are too kind." Qi raised his head to look at the sky. He said quickly, "Why would the celestial heavens care about the life and death of the devil race? If the celestial heavens don't give a shit, neither will Mingju. That's all I'm going to say. Can this piece of news allow Zhihua and me a chance to live?" Qin Mu's mind was in turmoil, and he waved his hands. His voice was hoarse. "Let them go. Let them go. Much thanks." Qi bowed and pulled along the muddle-headed Zhihua to quickly reach the peak of the sacrificial altar. He walked into the spirit energy mutual shift bridge, and both of them disappeared. Qin Mu's heart was messed up, and he suddenly shouted, "True God Pang Yu, True God Pang Yu." True God Pang Yu was on one side and was stunned. He hurriedly asked, "Cult Master Qin, is what Qi said true?" Qin Mu said solemnly, "No matter if it's true or not, there's no need to guard Supreme Emperor Heaven anymore. True God, mobilize everyone to leave Li City, Brilliance Injured City, and the rest of the cities. Get them to hurry over here and move to eternal peace." True God Pang Yu hesitated and said, "What if Qi gave a piece of fake news? Isn't that giving away Supreme Emperor Heaven to them?" Qin Mu spoke coldly, "If this is true, numerous soldiers of Supreme Emperor Heaven will die a miserable death." True God Pang Yu gritted his teeth and flew away. Qin Mu's heart was still in turmoil, and he raised his head to look at the sky. He looked at Li City, Brilliance Injured City, and the other god cities, and finally the crimson light star that was slowly moving. He suddenly shouted, "Continue to strengthen the mutual shift bridge. Stop spacing out, quickly." Dao Master Lin Xian and the rest came to a realization and hurried to work. Qin Mu also walked to and fro. He stopped in his tracks and took out the life and death book. He gritted his teeth and said, "How do I use this?" Mingju's Lu Yunxiu can unleash the power of the life and death book, so could I not unleash the power of the life and death book? He tested it again and again, yet the life and death book could only reflect the names of the people, it couldn't revive the dead. Right at that moment, the sky became brighter. Qin Mu raised his head, and his heart sank. He saw flowing fire in the sky, and it was a burning land hanging over Supreme Emperor Heaven. Luofu Heaven. The entire Luofu Heaven was burning. The ground was shaking, and the volcanoes were erupting. Lava had already spread throughout the land, and the sea had already evaporated, transforming into countless thunderclouds. Around the sacrificial altar, all of the gods had dazed expression, and they looked at the sky blankly. The sight was majestic and shocking to the heart. It made them forget about everything else as they looked up. "Strengthen the sacrificial altar." Qin Mu shouted and woke everyone from their daze. Everyone woke up and hurriedly strengthened the sacrificial altar. The speed of the star entering eternal peace increased, and brought even more pressure to the sacrificial altar. It was apparent that the gods in the floating world had also seen the sight in the sky and were trying to leave before Luofu Heaven landed. Li City was the closest, and true god Pang Yu used great magic power to move the army. The other gods of Supreme Emperor Heaven mobilized as well, and they hurried to the other god cities to move armies to the Spirit Energy Mutual Shift Bridge. Qin Mu immediately let the divine arts practitioners of Supreme Emperor Heaven enter the Mutual Shift Bridge, which increased the pressure on the bridge sharply. The ground in the surroundings cracked continuously, and deep ravines appeared. Only the Mutual Shift Bridge was still standing tall. If it continued like that, the Mutual Shift Bridge wouldn't be able to hold for much longer. Let the divine arts practitioners go ahead first. God stay behind. God Sang Yi shouted and said, "Senior brothers, go to the other god cities." Numerous gods left and hurriedly brought in more soldiers from all cities. Number people covered the vicinity of the Spirit Energy Mutual Shift Bridge, and they were all waiting to enter the bridge. The spirit energy that came spewing out from the bridge grew more and more violent. Light rushed into the sky, and it was even brighter than the sacrificed Luofu Heaven. The Mutual Shift Bridge trembled more and more violently, while the ground in the surroundings gave off loud rumbles. Rulai Ma, village chief, and the rest hurried over and used their own magic power to suppress the bridge. The help reduced the pressure on Xu Xinghua and the rest significantly, allowing them to fix the shattered runes. Qin Mu hurriedly took out his tools of calculation and observed the speed of Luofu Heaven's descent. He quickly calculated when Luofu Heaven would collide with Supreme Emperor Heaven, and where the place of impact would be. After a moment, he put down his spirit weapon in dejection. There are only 4 hours left. And the place of impact was vast. It was the center of Supreme Emperor Heaven, and it was close to Li City. The radius of the impact was over 10,000 miles. No matter if it were the human territory, or the devil territory, they would all be crushed by Luofu Heaven directly. He had a deep feeling of helplessness. Such a collision was something he couldn't prevent. Right at this moment, he saw figures flying up from the star and rushing towards the falling Luofu Heaven. There were lights from the devil race rushing into the sky and heading straight towards Luofu Heaven. Those were the gods of the floating world and the devil gods of the devil race. These gods and devils were using their powerful corporeal body and magic power to push away Luofu Heaven by force, attempting to change the original course of collision. In Lufu heaven, world-shaking roars of anger sounded out as thousands of gods used all of their power to bombard Lufu heaven. Even if they strained their muscles and tore the skin, they couldn't change the momentum of Lufu heaven. However, they didn't even slightly alter the momentum of Lufu heaven. Lufu heaven gradually moved down like an incomparably large frisbee that continued falling towards Supreme Emperor heaven. As time ticked by, more and more divine arts practitioners were entering the spirit energy mutual shift bridge. Soldiers were still sent over without end. More than half of the star had sunk into eternal peace. A rain of fire rained down from the sky, and those were the shattered pieces of Lufu heaven. Huge chunks of rock fell from the sky. Millions of flaming rocks streaked across the skies, and left behind trails of thick smoke as they struck the land. In the devil territory, Riluo was rushing forward and moving the divine arts practitioners from the devil race to the city with the strongest defense, which was gnawing Bite City. Other devil gods were also doing the same thing, but Riluo and the rest of the devil gods were only moving divine arts practitioners that were of a higher class. The lowly devils were left to weep miserably. Riluo's gaze had no emotions, and he did what he was supposed to do mechanically. When he came to Conjoining City, it was surprisingly quiet. The people weren't flustered and in a panic like the other cities. Conjoining City was peaceful, and even though the devils had also walked out onto the street, no one made a sound. He saw a mother hugging her child on the street and looking up at the sky. The child buried his face in his mother's chest. He even saw lovers hugging each other tightly, and numerous families were huddling together tightly. Their faces were serene as they looked at the sky. In the sky, huge pieces of shattered land fell towards Conjoining City, and in their eyes, the shattered pieces became bigger and bigger. The flames became more and more intense to the point that their faces had turned bright red. "Go!" Riluo shouted at them. No clansman replied to him, and the mother gently soothed the baby in her embrace. No one looked at their king. Boom! The shattered pieces of Lufu heaven crashed, erasing Conjoining City. All of the devils in the city were torn apart by the flames and explosions, vaporizing them in an instant. The terrifying explosion threw Riluo up, and blasted him several hundred miles away. Riluo smashed into a mountain and raised his head towards the sky, looking at the shattered sky in a daze. He stood up, and there were splotches of blood on his body. He suddenly let out a sorrowful and angry cry to the sky like an injured old wolf. Ah ah ah. His three faces distorted maliciously, and heart-ripping roars rang out. It was a few short roars at first as though he had no strength left. The roars at the end gradually grew longer and longer, becoming more and more heart-wrenching. The sight was similar to roars of despair when Qin Mu sat on a paper boat floating in Yudu, and saw Duqian Devil King standing on the ruins of his world. Trauma and helplessness filled his roars. Pitiful devils, you want to be a dog, yet the others don't care about the life of a dog at all. Riluo raised his head, and his red eyes looked at where the voice was coming from. He saw Saint Woodcutter walking over to him from afar, and the blazing fire of Conjoining City was everywhere. Heavenly Teacher stepped on the lava and walked out from the fire while shattered pieces of Lufu heaven dragged along trails of flames. Saint Woodcutter soon came to his front and said solemnly, Riluo, when you and I signed the Pact of Earth Count, you told me that it wasn't you that wanted to eradicate Supreme Emperor Heaven, but someone else. I didn't tell you back then that there are no complete eggs under an overturned nest. If Supreme Emperor Heaven is wiped out, do you think the devil race can live on? Riluo stared at him ruthlessly and hissed. Gnawing Bite City is the furthest away from the place of impact, and its defense is the strongest. The devils in the city can avoid this collision, so my devil race won't be erased because of this. Saint Woodcutter looked at him pitifully and asked, What about the places outside Gnawing Bite City? Fu Riluo breathed heavily. Gnawing Bite City could only protect 1/100th of the devil race, and the others of the devil race would die in the huge collision. It would spare none of them. 20,000 years ago, Kai Shi brought stars while escaping from his pursuers, and they came to Luofu heaven. The arrival of Kai Shi and the remaining survivors of Crimson Light made Luofu heaven uninhabitable. Therefore you guys have no choice but to lay your hands on Supreme Emperor Heaven. Saint Woodcutter said softly, in that case, who was the one that forced Kai Shi and those stars to Luofu heaven? Have you never thought of the reason? In fact, you are very clear who Crimson Light Era's enemy was, you just don't dare to think that way. You still held a little delusion in your heart. It's time to wake up from your delusion. Fu Riluo laughed loudly. They had indeed schemed against the remaining survivors of Crimson Light, and my devil race. They forced my devil race to have no choice but to fight with Supreme Emperor Heaven, but what about you? You aren't any better yourself. You constructed the sacrificial altars, and Lu Yinsu used them to sacrifice Luofu Heaven. Why are you able to escape? You have always been waiting for the people of the celestial heavens to come, so you could borrow their hands to sacrifice Luofu Heaven, forcing me into your camp. I'm not an idiot. Saint Woodcutter looked at him and said calmly, you are indeed not an idiot, and I had the plan to force you into my camp by the hands of the celestial heavens. However, if you think the celestial heavens wouldn't sacrifice Luofu without the altars, you are too simple. Fu Riluo was silent. Saint Woodcutter continued to say, it doesn't matter if I constructed the sacrificial altars or not, the celestial heavens would still sacrifice Luofu Heaven. They will destroy the ancestral land of your devil race, using Luofu Heaven to crash into Supreme Emperor Heaven. Supreme Emperor Heaven will also die, and no life forms will be able to survive him. The need to survive and reproduce will force the devils into eternal peace, and then the celestial heavens can borrow your hands to wipe out eternal peace. That is their goal. Fu Riluo became decrepit and asked, when you made the Pact of Earth count, you already predicted this day would come, right? Why didn't you say anything? Before today, we were enemies. Why did I have to say it? Saint Woodcutter stretched out a hand and said solemnly, from today onwards, are we friends or foes? Fu Riluo looked at this hand and hesitated slightly. After a moment, the two hands gripped each other tightly. Luofu Heaven was falling at an angle, and finally collided with Supreme Emperor Heaven. Beside the Spirit Energy Mutual Shift Bridge, Qin Mu looked at Luofu Heaven, which was slowly crashing down. It was crushing Li City, the God City that had gone through countless wars. The divine arts practitioners of Supreme Emperor Heaven squeezed frantically into the Spirit Energy Mutual Shift Bridge, and even Qin Mu lost his footing from being squeezed. People lost their camaraderies and trampled over one another, as they tried their best to escape for their lives. Mua, village chief, Granny Sai and the rest avoided the crowd that was squeezing over. Qin Mu saw them in the crowd and forced a smile. I'm fine, really. Where Luofu Heaven landed, the ground was like a glass smashed by a heavy object, causing pieces of land to crack and fly up. Red-hot lava poured out from the cracks on the ground. The sight made the ground look soft and brittle. It was like waves being thrown into the air, flooding out in all directions. Dirt and rocks formed a 1,000-mile wall. It looked like waves mixed with lava and flames, and even the mountains that were 100,000 feet high were merely an insignificant splash. The collision created tornadoes and swept in all directions to destroy everything. Lightning turned into the most violent storm that swept throughout Supreme Emperor Heaven at the fastest speed. The flames formed a mushroom cloud that was currently rising into the sky. Soon, it reached the vicinity of the suns which Imperial Preceptor and the divine arts practitioners of Supreme Emperor Heaven had forged. The two sons broke apart like paper. Mua, go. Village chief and the rest shouted, quickly go into the bridge. You can survive in this kind of situation. Mua looked at this sight in a daze. Granny Sai barged through the crowd and pulled him straight towards the bridge. People were frantically climbing all over the bridge, squeezing and stepping on one another. Qin Mu got pulled along by Granny Sai and stumbled up. He turned his head back with a dazed look on her face. He saw gods that were colliding with the surroundings, trying their best to defend against this destructive impact. They were trying to fight for a chance for the people to escape. The gods of Supreme Emperor Heaven and the floating world broke apart in the incomparably bright light, which scorched their corporeal body, igniting and vaporizing them into nothing. Even the gods were insignificant in front of the destructive power. He couldn't see the situation on the devil side as Lufu Heaven had blocked his vision, but he could imagine it. Devil gods roaring in anger, struggling with their lives to defend against the collision between heaven and earth, and trying to find a chance of survival for their own people. They knew they had no power to defend against it even if they were devil gods, but they were willing to die for their clansmen. I'm fine. I'm fine, Qin Mu muttered. The event signaled the end of everything: Supreme Emperor Heaven, the people who couldn't leave in time, and the devil race that they had fought for 20,000 years. At that moment, he watched as first ancestor human emperor, the man that had escaped from the battle 20,000 years ago, descended from the sky and landed at the place where the two worlds were colliding. First ancestor was defending against the destructive power from the collision of the two worlds. He was fighting for more time, and the techniques he used were sacred secrets of heaven and earth heart, while his mudra skill was heaven and earth mudra skills. He stood in the natural disasters, and seemed to go back into the battle that had happened 20,000 years ago. He seemed to become the him of 20,000 years ago. Only, unlike in the past, he didn't run. His technique and his mudra skill were all cultivated to deal with such a situation. It would establish a heart for the destroyed heaven and earth, to establish life for the people. Qin Mu looked at the man from afar, and it was the first time he had seen first ancestor serious and in high spirits. First ancestor human emperor's mudra skills were to deal with such a world-changing situation. Heaven and earth mudra blocked natural disasters, and was fighting for more time to let the people escape. Suddenly, the spirit energy mutual shift bridge trembled violently. The runes on the surface of the sacrificial altar started to explode as the components forged from divine metals and materials began to break apart. Cracking sounds came from the insides of the sacrificial altar. Qin Mu's expression changed drastically, and he shouted, "The bridge is collapsing, don't go in. Hurry, come out now, the bridge is collapsing." His voice was loud and rang throughout the whole area, but people continued to rush into the bridge. At that moment, the bridge collapsed, and the light that was rushing into the sky vanished instantly. Countless severed bodies fell from the sky. Most of the star had already entered eternal peace, but there was still a portion of the star that was sliced off. The sliced off section was incomparably flat. The broken star that got sliced off fell and became larger and larger as it was about to crash into Supreme Emperor Heaven. Qin Mu's heart turned cold as he saw numerous severed bodies of divine arts practitioners smashing down like rain droplets. They were the people that couldn't teleport to eternal peace in time. When space closed, they were severed into two halves in an instant, leaving half of their bodies in Supreme Emperor Heaven and half of their bodies in eternal peace. "What should we do?" Someone cried out like a helpless child. "What should we do? Now there's no bridge. We are all going to die here." It left the heaven torn and the earth split. Meteors fell like rain, and the natural disasters were still rushing forth with violent impacts. It was a scene of doomsday. First ancestor still stood there defending as he executed mudra after mudra to fight against the destructive impact by himself. The prince of the founding emperor era was already puking blood from exhaustion, leaving his shirt blooded. The reason all the divine arts practitioners around the spirit energy mutual shift bridge could live so long was all because of him blocking the impact. However, if it continued, first ancestor human emperor would die from exhaustion. True God Pang Yu flew forward and shouted sternly, "Everyone, follow me." He went to first ancestor human emperor's side and worked together with him to defend against the impact. Preserve the younglings of our supreme emperor heaven. God Sang Yi and the rest were stunned before rushing forward. They surrounded them and pitted their lives against heaven and earth being destroyed. Village chief, butcher, mute and the rest were among them. Rulai Ma even led the monks to join them. The old Taoists of Tao sect, the old immortals of Little Jade Capital, and the generals and dukes of eternal peace went forward to put their lives on the line. They moved to protect the divine arts practitioners of Supreme Emperor Heaven and eternal peace. A youth carrying a chest walked out from the crowd and headed towards the gods. Cripple's expression changed, and he cried out, "Xing'an, if you lay your hands on us now, I'll steal from all of your ancestors." The youth didn't say a word and put the chest down. A true dragon belt flew out from his waist, and Xing'an revealed his devil god body to defend against the impact with everyone. Qin Mu shouted loudly, "Those that are still alive, follow me." He walked forward, and the other divine arts practitioners stumbled forward after him. Qin Mu came to first ancestor's side and risked his life to fight against the impact. With all of their hot blood coursing through their bodies, they executed their divine arts to form a large shield. It's permeated by this spirit. In the destructive impact, a bold and unrestrained singing voice rang out. What is permeated by this spirit lives on forever revered. It links up the cosmos, so how can life and death compare in importance? That was Butcher who was let loose of his heroism. Even the brink of life and death couldn't block his splendor. Heroism churned in Qin Mu's chest as he continued with rampaging emotions. The corners of earth depend on it to stand, the pillars of heaven depend on it to maintain their honor. The three relationships really do determine one's life. Butcher laughed loudly and ended it off. Moral righteousness is the root. Butcher used divine spear long tuor to defend against the impact and snorted. Frivolous. The most frivolous one was blind, and he usually liked to show off his literary excellence with poetry. Yet, after Butcher walked out of his crazed state and recovered his previous splendor, and began to show off, Blind was basically out of the show. Unity of will was an impregnable stronghold. Even though they would only preserve a few god cities under the impact, everyone had their spirits roused from hearing Butcher and Qin Mu's bold singing voices. The divine arts around them were like an indestructible god city that first ancestor human emperors heaven and earth mudra had transformed into the sky and land of the god city, as well as its four walls. The gods were the generals that strengthened the walls while Qin Mu and the tens of thousands of divine arts practitioners were soldiers standing on top of the walls, defending against the invasion of the enemy. They connected their qi and blood, and their divine arts linked up with one another to defend against the terrifying power. Everyone felt the incomparably terrifying pressure. Some people even had the blood vessels in their body explode. Blood flowed out of them and turned them into bloody people. Some had their tendons ripped and their skin split, while others had their bones broken. However, no one backed off, not even with both of their hands broken. After all, they still had their primordial spirit, and could still execute divine arts. Finally, the first wave of impact, which was the most terrifying, was over. First ancestor human emperor's legs suddenly buckled and he fainted onto the ground. Many pairs of arms grabbed him and didn't let him fall to the ground. Instead, they placed him down gently. Even though there were many divine arts practitioners and gods, first ancestor human emperor withstood more than 90% of the pressure for their safety. He was a strong practitioner of god execution stage, surpassing the other gods by leaps and bounds. Even if everyone combined their power, it was still far inferior to his. Qin Mu, an apothecary, went forward to examine his injuries and helped treat him. Meanwhile, the other gods surrounded them and continued to block the aftermath. At that moment, Supreme Emperor Heaven was like a hell covered in lava. Lava rained down from the sky along with black-colored ashes and flaming rocks the size of mountains. Hot winds were blowing at speeds 100 times faster than sound, turning lava into huge overflowing waves that rolled past everything in their way. When the ground trembled, it caused the volcanoes to erupt from under the sea of lava. It resulted in pillars of fire that reached hundreds of thousands of miles into the sky. The sky had long broken apart, and the shattered pieces of space that shone with multiple colors no longer had any thickness. They flowed in the sky with a strange light. Some just flew at a rapid speed as though they were the sharpest blade, one which could slice anything they passed. The breathable air was nearly exhausted, and toxic gas, which could corrode their lungs, filled every breath of polluted air. Even if they held their breath, the poison could still seep into their skin. Xing'an opened his chest and took out a handful of seeds. He gave the seeds a gentle blow, causing grass and willow trees to grow around them. The rather peaceful piece of land they protected had a radius of 6 to 7 miles. It had become one of the few pure lands in Supreme Emperor Heaven that had not turned into a world of lava. That was the reason Xing'an was able to use creation divine arts to grow grass and trees, purifying the air. Luli Ma gently pushed his palms apart, and the pure land rose. The grass and trees floated to the back of his head and landed inside the apparition of the 20 heavens. He used the rays of Buddha to nourish the only remaining greenery. Clean air started to emanate into the surroundings, and everyone gasped for air greedily. We can't continue like this. Using their Buddha rays, Luli Ma and the rest of the monks formed a huge barrier of light to protect everyone. Even if we use creation techniques, we can't last too long here. The sky will become black sooner or later. Without any light, and with the non-existent spirit energy, our cultivation will deteriorate over time. We will eventually turn into skeletons here. Xing'an closed his chest and suddenly said, Cult Master Qin, you should have a way to build another spirit energy mutual shift bridge, am I right? Qin Mu and Apothecary were working together to suppress first ancestor human emperor's injuries. Impossible. Even though I have enough materials, the sacrificial altar over at the Great Ruins shattered at the same time as the sacrificial altar over here. The spirit energy pouring over crushed the two sacrificial altars at the same time, and without the altar in Great Ruins, I can't construct the mutual shift bridge. Xing'an frowned and looked at the shattered sky. He shook his head and said, the gods might be able to survive, but they will slowly become weaker. However, the divine arts practitioners won't survive for long. They are all burdens, so let's just abandon them. There were still tens of thousands of divine arts practitioners in the surroundings, and their hearts turned cold when they heard his words. This video will end here.